and I'll let you take it away. Okay.
Okay. So, um, generally in my normal life, I teach, well, sort of normal, I teach English for specific academic purposes at Rupin Academic Center in Israel. Rupin Academic Center is a college that has both BA and MA and MBA programs. However, during the summer of 2019, together with my colleague, Karen Aney, I had the amazing and incredible privilege of teaching an elective English course in professional English to engineering students at the Guangdong Technion Israel Institute of Technology. GTIIT is an English medium instruction university in the Guangdong province of China, and it's a joint initiative between the Technion in Israel, which is a university in Israel, and Shantou University in China. Now, our Chinese students, EMI means, again, English medium instruction, and our Chinese students studied all of their Bachelor of Science disciplinary subjects in English. So that included subjects such as food engineering, chemistry, physics, everything. And they were required to write various different kinds of texts in English. Now, Karen and I, did not know all of these texts because we're English teachers. We're not engineers or engineering teachers. So we had to figure out a way to teach certain text types that we may not have known deeply, or we may not have understood in great depth. And I want to share an example that we did for lab reports. And from this example, I think you'll be able to step back at the end and use it for any type of unfamiliar text that you have to teach in your classroom. So without further ado, we started out by helping our students become familiar with the lab reports by using the IMRAD discourse format, which stands for Introduction, Method, Results, and Discussion. And this may be familiar to you from various academic or empirical research articles or things that you've had to write yourselves, like your master's thesis or your doctoral dissertations. And the students were somewhat familiar with it from reading, but they certainly had never used it for writing. So let me move to the next slide. We developed a lesson flow for writing, and we used it for writing lab reports. Now, we had 2 lessons of 2 hours each to work on the lab reports. And we used, for this particular lesson type, we used a jigsaw technique, a cooperative learning method that brings both individual accountability and achievement of team goals. We developed a lesson flow. I hope you're familiar with that. If I have time, I'll explain it more later, but I think you'll understand it. We developed this lesson flow to use for both lessons. The first lesson focused on recognition of the text type. The second one was on production. So in the first lesson, our students worked in their home groups. They were grouped in groups of 4, approximately 4 or 5, and they were given sample lab reports that they had to analyze, identifying the various IMRAD parts and noticing and underlining or highlighting the vocabulary and rhetorical structures that were generic to the lab reports. This was our hook. If you see on the left, we called it a hook, or basically the conscious raising activity we used for this lesson. And each group then reported back to the class, and together we built a bank of language elements. This was our language input and recognition part. We then had the students apply the language in various practice activities where they reflected on their learning and they self-assessed what they had internalized. So keeping this lesson flow in mind, I'm going to move on to the second lesson. The second lesson, we worked on the production, as I said before, and they actually had to write lab reports. Now, we were teaching in a regular classroom with tables, whiteboards, projectors. Had we been science teachers, we might have done an actual experiment with our students, but we aren't science teachers. So in order to create a stimulating and engaging topic for the lab report, we used a YouTube clip of a science experiment about Orbeez. Now, I don't know if you know what Orbeez are. They're these little tiny absorbent polymer beads, And when you add water, the molecules in the bead absorb the water and they expand in size up to 150 times their original size. Now, this Orbeez experiment involved filling a pool with 25 million Orbeez to find out whether or not you would sink or float if you jumped in. So this was the hook for our lesson, and we had them watch this video as a class. Following the video, we grouped the students in expert groups based on the IMRAD division, where each group was responsible for one part of a lab report. They discussed and analyzed and pulled together the information from their section of the IMRAD and made sure that each member of the group would be able to share their part when returning to their home groups. This meant taking notes. It meant being very cognizant of what your part was when you return to your previous home group. Now, once back in the home groups, each student shared their part of the lab report with the other group members. They organized themselves in class, and they continued working at home to prepare the lab report that was due the very next morning. This was an intensive summer course, so they didn't have a lot of time to monkey around with this. They had to have it to turn in for a grade by the next morning. Now, we were kind of shocked at the quality of the results that we got. So the students worked in their expert groups on their sections, and we were surprised that we didn't receive, none of the 5 reports from each class, or 6 reports, were the same, despite the fact that each member of the home group came from a similar group. In other words, they all brought the same information, and yet the way they put it together, the way they developed it, was completely different. And I want to share one of the group's development because it was extremely impressive, and we were kind of blown away. So in this case, they first went about explaining what Orbeez were and what the experiment was about. They had a very clear introduction. They then did something that surprised us. These super achiever students, and most of our Chinese students were super achievers. These were kids who were at the top 10% of their classes in China, maybe even 5% in some cases. They went on to identify each of the people in the YouTube movie, and they developed a key and a document regarding the information of the jumps that each participant made. So you can see here, this was not stated explicitly. None of this was stated in the movie. They must have listened to it 25 times to get all of that information and to chart it the way they did. And once they completed the report, we had them hand it in, and they then worked together to peer review the various different reports. They were all shared on a drive where they could be accessed by the different kids in the classes, and we gave them clear guidelines about how to review a peer's work. In other words, what are you looking at? How can you do it? And they shocked us at the way they were able to give constructive feedback in a positive way. It was, again, for us, it was so reinforcing. Okay, how much time do I have? Another minute. Okay, so basically at the end, each group then received a grade based on a rubric that we had shared with them in advance. They knew how they were going to be graded. And what I want to do now, so that is what we did. Now I want to just step back a little bit and summarize the process. So I want to zoom out. I guess that's a different meaning of Zoom. And again, start with some kind of stimulus or prompt from something that's familiar to you and that would be familiar to the students. In other words, take it almost metaphorically, the text type that you're going to be working on, and find something that would be a great consciousness raising activity for your students. Then have them produce their own text. So this is the full text of what they produced. This is what they came up with. And in summary, we'd like you to be, I hope you'll be able to take this process to your classroom and use it for any new text type that your students have to produce. Thank you very much.